Welcome to the Tony Tompkins Show, the show which endeavours to give you the facts and some valuable opinions. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Charlie Kirk. I'm a little bit over the everlasting continual commentary around Charlie. I acknowledge that it is sad that someone has lost their lives under the circumstances in which Charlie was assassinated. So I recognise the horror of all of that, and particularly how that must be for his wife, his two kids, and for those people that cared and loved him dearly. There is no but to any of that. That's just the way it is, and that's how I feel about it. It's very sad. However, there are ways by which people are responding around this which are of concern to me. And so my role then is to discuss those concerns with you so that we can have a shared understanding as to whether or not my concerns are relevant or not. And my primary concern about all of this is not really about whether Charlie was a good or a bad bloke. I disagree primarily with all of the policies that I've heard him expound over the years. I disagree with most things that are Donald Trump, and he was joined at the hip to Trump to some extent, and he assisted Trump in getting into winning the presidency. So, and it needs, and I guess because of all of that, the accolades from the right are justifiable. Here in Australia, though, this is, and I know it's happening in the United States as well, where people are talking about this as being a moment whereby we start to look to the worst of humankind. And there have been some voices from Bannon, Hannity, and others in the United States that are suggesting that this is the moment in which the United States could start heading into a civil war. I think it's worth noting that no one really wants a civil war. And those people that are even suggesting that that should be the case, the sort of people like the generals who would sit on top of a hill and watch all the minions and the soldiers run towards the onslaught and get slaughtered while they're, comfortable sitting some kilometres away from the action. And so we have some people, Bannon and his ilk, who are suggesting that this should be the battle ahead, even though I'm sure they would not be the ones on the front line. They're encouraging others to do just that. And so what interests me is the way the right wing are responding. So I've got a short clip I'm going to play from Peter Credlin, and then I've got a longer piece from James Morrow because he makes some points which I find quite horrific. And what I want is, and then I've got a final clip which I'm going to show all of. It's not very long, from Bernie Sanders, because we've got two Australians commenting on all of this. Influential Australians, I hasten to add, and I've said this before, I give Sky News credit where credit is due, and they deserve the credit because they have built up a substantial following, particularly on YouTube and social media. But they're fostering a type of politics that I find repulsive, and that I think many of us, or not many of us, but people like myself and others who have a more progressive view of the world should make a stand, should certainly say, well, there are other ways of viewing the world apart from the ways that you're presenting. And the problem that I find with most of this is the degree of facts that they don't produce. So in this opening segment with Peter Credlin, they talk about this as if they know who the shooter is. So there are a whole lot of assumptions made around this particular shooter that is definitely, there's no disputing this. Those assumptions are not based on fact. There is no fact whatsoever that supports any of their arguments in terms of whether this was left or rightly motivated. And so I'll show you what Peter has to say, a little bit of hers, and then probably a little bit more of what James Morrow says, because they have it wrong, in my view. And if you've got a view that is different, I do suggest you subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications, join the community so that you can have a conversation about many of the things that I do discuss. So here's Peter doing her thing.
As I said at the top of the show, the shooting of Conservative commentator Charlie Kirk has sent shockwaves not just through the United States, but around the world. Sadly, it points to the growing spectre of violence creeping into our politics, largely directed at Conservatives.
That is unequivocally false. And that's part of the agenda that people like Peter Credlin are trying to manifest. And it's wrong. And we want to know, are you talking just about the United States here, Peter, or are you talking about Australia? And I certainly hope you're not talking about Australia, because that's not the case here. And as you'll soon discover, when Ezra Klein brought up a lovely piece actually on X, which talks about the number of people that have been assaulted and those that have been killed, the politicians. Interestingly enough, most of them are Democrats. So I don't know where she gets this information from, but certainly one can see which direction she is wanting to head. Now, I just wanted to play that little bit because that was false. And now we'll go to my other mate, James Morrow.
Good evening and welcome to the program at the end of a very somber week. And I tell you what, in all the years of doing this program, this would have to be the grimmest U.S. report I've ever presented. It's now a little over 36 hours since the news broke that Charlie Kirk, and he needs no introduction, was taken out by a single shot from a...
Well, he probably does need some introduction. As my understanding is, and the people that I know, not many people know who Charlie Kirk is. Just because you know who he is, James, and because I know who he is, and some in the media know who he is, doesn't mean that your viewers do.
A sniper's bullet in Utah. His crime? His provocation? Well, we don't know for sure, but it is a fair bet that the only thing he did wrong, the only thing that attracted that assassin's bullet, was to be a conservative.
Now, this is where he makes an assumption, and he tries to correct it by saying, well, we don't know. But then he makes the assumption, and it's the assumption which is important here, because it tells us all we need to know about James Morrow's thinking, that somehow this had to be a conservative. We need to remember that the young man who attempted to assassinate Donald Trump the first time was a registered Republican. It does fit with Morrow's version of events.
An outspoken conservative who had an incredible talent for bringing young people over to his side of politics through his famous Change My Mind debate series, where he would sit at a table and literally take all comers and use reason and Socratic dialogue to argue his case and win converts.
And on that very point, Charlie's reason for doing all of that was because he said himself at a recent event, not the one in which he was assassinated, but he said himself that his purpose for being there was to educate. He wasn't there to debate. He was there to educate. And when I've been watching some of those videos of Charlie's, I do appreciate what he was doing because it was very skilled. It was clever. So what you can do in those sorts of discussions, so it's not a debate. That's a furphy. He wasn't debating anybody. He would have someone ask him a question, and then he would ask them a whole host of questions around the question that they asked. Now, what that does is, for a person who's got a heated question to ask and they're excited about being able to ask that question, it deflates them. It takes the energy out of the conversation, and as a result of that, you can often find that people are placed on the back foot. They don't know what to do, they don't know what to say, they keep having to justify who they are. And the principle is, and I know this from the communication stuff I've done over the years, that when you attempt to get someone to justify what they're saying and what they're doing, you create a sense of confusion and unease. And that's what Charlie was really good at. 10 out of 10 for that, but it wasn't a debate. He didn't debate, he just questioned. And then he would give his opinion, and his opinion would never change. So in a debate sometimes, or in a discussion, the idea would be to have a look at someone else's point of view and see whether or not you can persuade them to be different. Charlie was never interested in persuading anybody to think differently about things. He was just interested in challenging them and asking them questions, because that's who he was. And he was, in all fairness, very good at it.
Kirk was incredibly passionate about America and young people, and getting young people to believe in a brighter future when they were born into a system that seemed, and indeed seems, to be failing them. He built the massive Turning Point USA network, and he got results. He managed to help massive numbers of young Americans, particularly young men, move away from the left and the leftist indoctrination they'd received every day of their lives.
Instead, I need to say, he brings up these charts. He doesn't refer to them, so I have no idea what they're referring to. They're talking about, men and women in certain age groups who vote Republican and Democrats. It's a Pew Research, and I don't know what the question was.
Through the schools and popular culture. And of course, he was close to President Trump and the MAGA movement. They killed him, but his legacy will be the most conservative generation in generation.
They killed him. Who are they? Who are they, James? Tell us who they are, because you're about to.
What happened this week is not just a terrible tragedy for Kirk, his widow, and his 2 young children left without a father. It is also a tragedy for America because it represents an incredibly dangerous escalation of leftist violence.
Now, this is the point. We don't know who the killer was. We don't know what leanings that killer had politically. We don't know any of this information. However, the leap has to be, and this is what scares me, is that people like Morrow and Credlin want to push this Americanized version of right versus left. And I personally think it's extremely dangerous.
Or rather, I should say, an escalation of the leftist celebration of violence. Because while it is true that over the years, Democrats as well as Republicans have lost their lives to political...
The left do not celebrate violence, in my view. Now, I'm not suggesting there may be some examples of some, and he brings up some at the moment, which are completely irrelevant. I'm going to skip through that section when he does that, because there's just people on TikTok and whatever. And it's easy to find people that may have celebrated Charlie's death, and I don't support any of those sorts of activities whatsoever. But he brings them up and shows them as examples of the left. And I'll show you Bernie Sanders' example of how to respond around this moment, which is far different from what these dudes do.
Political violence in America, and all of that is bad, all of that is evil, all of that needs to stop. Only one side seems to celebrate it.
Do you support his death?
I'm just gonna move through this bit because it is crap.
I love that last one in particular. You see the logic here? Kirk was a supporter of the Second Amendment right to bear arms, and for that, the left thinks he deserves to have been shot.
The left do not think that, you friggin' load of human excrement. And this is my problem with them, is that they they profess to know the answers to things for which they don't have any facts or any information about whatsoever, apart from some scanty crap that appears on social media. And if this is what the Sky News think is appropriate reporting, then, they're further in the mire than what one would have expected.
Now, that's some great, but I think very telling logic there. Because what are they saying? Take away our guns, otherwise we'll be forced to shoot you. Seriously.
I incidentally don't understand this logic at all, but someone can explain it to me, that's fine.
It's right up there with Islam is a religion of peace and death to anyone who says otherwise. A visibly rattled Trump, himself the victim of 2 assassination attempts, addressed the hate on the left shortly after the killing.
We won't bother talking about Trump because, again, Trump blames the left with no information whatsoever. So I wanted to come to Bernie's response around this. This is just 4 minutes, but I'm going to play the whole lot. And just let me know what you think after we finish this, because I think what Bernie says is something that most of us on the left would agree with.
Thank you very much for joining me. I want to say a few words regarding the terrible murder yesterday of Charlie Kirk, someone who I strongly disagreed with on almost every issue, but who was clearly a very smart and effective communicator and organizer, and someone unafraid to get out into the world and engage the public. My condolences go out to his wife and his family. A free and democratic society, which is what America is supposed to be about, depends upon the basic premise that people can speak out, organize, and take part in public life without fear, without worrying that they might be killed, injured, or humiliated for expressing their political views. In fact, that is the essence of what freedom is about and what democracy is about. You have a point of view, that's great. I have a point of view that is different than yours. That's great. Let's argue it out. We make our case to the American people at the local, state, and federal levels, and we hold free elections in which the people decide what they want. That's called freedom and democracy. And I want as many people as possible to participate in that process without fear. Freedom and democracy is not about political violence. It is not about assassinating public officials. It is not about trying to intimidate people who speak out on an issue. Political violence, in fact, is political cowardice. It means that you cannot convince people of the correctness of your ideas, and you have to impose them through force. Every American, no matter what one's political point of view may be, must condemn all forms of political violence and all forms of intimidation. We must welcome and respect dissenting points of view. That's what our Constitution is about. That's what our Bill of Rights is about. That, in fact, is what freedom is about. The murder of Charlie Kirk is part of a disturbing rise in political violence that threatens to hollow out public life and make people afraid of participating. From the January 6, 2021 attack on the United States Capitol, to the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, to the attack on Paul Pelosi, to the attempted kidnapping of Michigan Governor Whitmer, to the murder of Minnesota's Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman, and her husband, to the arson attack on Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, to the shooting of United Health Executive Brian Thompson, and the shooting several years ago of Representative Steve Scalise, this chilling rise in violence has targeted public officials across the political spectrum. Sadly, this is not a new phenomenon. We all remember the assassinations of President Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Senator Robert F. Kennedy, John Lennon, Medgar Evers, and the attempted assassinations of President Ronald Reagan and Alabama Governor George Wallace. This is a difficult and contentious moment in American history. Democracy in our country and throughout the world is under attack. And there are a lot of reasons for that which need serious discussion. But bottom line, if we honestly believe in democracy, if we believe in freedom, all of us must be loud and clear. Political violence, regardless of ideology, is not the answer and must be condemned. Thank you very much.
And I concur with everything that Bernie has said. And one of the key issues there for me is that there are serious issues that we need to deal with in this country. And immigration, racism, homelessness, housing, electricity bills, energy, net zero. The list is almost endless. But it is the discussion around those, it is the debate around those that is important. And as Bernie says, the purpose of democracy is to convince certain groups of people, as many people as you can, that your position is a good and righteous position. And if you can convince enough people of that, you win an election and you get elected. And if you fail to meet up to the standard, you get kicked out at the next election. That's democracy. Whether or not we have that democracy here remains to be seen, I think. I hope we can maintain it, and I hope we don't head down the same path as the United States. Let me know what you think about all of that. I'll be most interested in your comments. In the meantime, just take care of yourself.